Thank you, Alan. And thank you again to City of Refuge for hosting this. I've already had hugs and conversations with some amazing people here and from across the Bay Area. And this is kind of a very special place for me. About 15 years ago, I lived, am I not being, usually I don't have the problem of not being loud. Usually they're like, can you hear me okay? All right. God, I can't even walk around. I'll have to be good to stand here. All right. So, okay, I'm going to try to be good. That's dangerous. That's dangerous. I'll wander too much. Anyway, this has a lot of meaning for me because about 15 years ago, I used to live on Lake Merritt. You know where Fruitvale, and it's right before it? Yeah, I lived on an apartment there. And about 15 years ago, you would have found me in my closet, crying, looking at the wall and not knowing what was going on. Because I was a person who was experiencing significant mental health challenges. I came here about 1999 to go to law school at University of California, Hastings over in San Francisco, in the middle of the Tenderloin. So if you have any illusions about how law works and does not work before you go to UC Hastings, yeah, you see it every day. And interestingly enough, I went into criminal defense law and disability law. And for a little while, I worked at the San Francisco General Hospital Lock Psych units. Right? Now it's, and I was an attorney there. And I basically heard people's stories and I represented them on 17-hour to 14-day holds. And I loved that. I loved hearing people's stories, and I loved listening to people and being their servant, to tell their story to the judge, and to talk about their worth in the system. Not to, write down stuff or give them a diagnosis, but just like, what is your story? What do you want us to know about you and what's going on in your life right now? Graduated from Hastings and went and did disability law at Disability Rights Advocates, if anybody heard of them. They're in Oakland. Yeah, oh good. Good people. But of course, right, after finishing my fellowship with them, I'd started my own special ed process, had to have some surgery, came out okay, but I got broken. I'd grown up in a family that was pretty violent and was pretty abusive. I'm not going to go into that too far. But I fell apart. And looking back, I'd been suffering from severe depressions and other kinds of symptoms most of my life. But I was able to manage that by just working really hard. Good workaholic, right? Traveler, workaholic, it looks good, right? So you look at me, you look at my LinkedIn page, wow, she's got all this stuff going on. I was numb, because I did not want to feel what I felt. And so after surgery, I had to stop, and I had to rest, and I couldn't do that. The flashbacks got really bad. I would lose hours of a time, and I would be afraid and sit in my closet. And I thought a lot. I was living up on the 5th floor of a building. I would think every day about jumping off. I have to talk myself into not doing it. But I was and am incredibly lucky, right? I have tremendous amounts of privilege that a lot of people do not. The color of my skin, which shouldn't matter, did. The fact that I was an attorney and I had that educational privilege so I could argue with my insurance company. My husband was supporting me. He's like, look, this woman needs help now. We're not going to wait this 30, 48 days, whatever you want to do. We need to get her in to see somebody now. I was able to fight for myself. A lot of people, I know the right words. I know the magic words in the insurance industry to get in. And I had insurance through my husband. I lost my own, but I got covered by him. So I was able to meet with some amazing therapists and doctors who were able to diagnose what was going on with me. And we're not our diagnosis, but I'll tell you what it is. It was ADD. It was complex PTSD. It was dissociative identity disorder, not otherwise specified, which means nobody quite knows what it is, and that's okay. And it was severe depression, right? And so it was labels, and not those labels, but they're somewhere in a chart, you know, it's real. But I got help. And part of the best help I got was actually from church. The churches I had been going to, I will not name names, they were not UCC churches. They were actually not probably a church you've heard of, but there was in the area. I tried to talk to the pastor and was told that we don't discuss those things. Again, this is not, you know, I grew up in a very conservative denomination in Dallas, and I walked away from the church around some of the stage, the LGBT projection thing, and I had gone, and I was coming back because I really needed God and I really needed community. But my first interactions with churches was, okay, you look really nice, so we'll let you in, but don't talk about that stuff.
Right.
You're not supposed to be a mess. You've got to be together. You've got degrees. You know, just pull yourself together, please. But the happy moral of the story is, and this was amazing, this was my call to ministry, right? So I didn't find anybody, but there was a Bible study at UCC Oakland. And there was an interim minister, and I do not remember her name because I was not really well at the time. She wore cowboy boots. This would have been 15, 17 years ago, right? That was her. Oh my God, that's a miracle. Okay, now I know who she was. She had an inclusive Bible study, and she talked about her struggles with alcoholism and depression. And I was in there, and I went, wow, we can talk about this? And that transformed my life. Because the call that I got was that I never want anyone else to go to their church in need and be told, we don't want to hear about that. Now, there were churches around that were doing this. Reverend Barbara Meyer here has been doing mental health ministry here in the Bay Area for a long time. City of Refuge. I just didn't find you. There were people who have been doing this work, but I didn't find you. So now, I'm an ordained minister, and everybody knows, it's in my ordination paper, this is what I've lived through. And I'm an example of how recovery works, because I live a very, very good and blessed life. Wouldn't have done it without God, would not have done it without communities, my faith community and also NAMI, that supported me and let me get to the point where I knew how to manage symptoms and thrive. And if I can do it, we can all do it, to whatever level we're supposed to, right? Because all our lives are precious. So I don't normally tell this part of the story, but this community is part of my healing story, so I wanted to share that. I am here because of some of you, and I really don't think I would have made it if I hadn't found some people, both of faith and mental health professionals in the Bay Area, who were willing to walk with me and were willing to take me seriously. Because at my sickest, I looked really good. I could color coordinate without thinking about it. So many people told me, you know, well, you don't look ill, so you can't be ill. You cannot look at someone and know they're suffering. You cannot look at them. And so there are some people, obviously, we won't talk to or look at. They're homeless. We have all these judgments, not we, the larger society about them. But then we also have the issue of people who don't look like they should be sick. We don't let them talk about their truth either. So we've got to make space for both. Got to make space for both. So anyway, thank you for hearing that story. And I'm really honored to be here today because many churches want to do that. But at the Mental Health Network, we had to think about, okay, well, how do you actually do that? Because it's one thing to say, we want to be this kind of church. It's another thing to actually walk as a congregation through that process. So together, this is what we're going to look at today. And my own church, Mountain View United Church, has done this process. 11 other churches have as well. So it's doable. And I think maybe a lot of your churches have done a lot of this work anyway, but it's a way of naming it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go to my next slide here. Now, Sarah has already talked about inclusion and talked a lot about what I was going to talk about on this slide. But I'll go over the basics. So becoming a wise congregation for mental health means that we are become and intentionally remain sacred places of radical belonging that are wise. Welcoming, inclusive, supportive, and engaged with individuals, not to, not at, not for, individuals experiencing despair and or living with mental health challenges, substance use disorders, and brain disorders. Because we do know that many times mental health and substance use disorders go hand in hand, because if you can't get treatment and you're suffering, what are you going to do? You're going to try to find a way to stay alive, right? And so I'm going to go back to the lawyer thing for a minute and focus on belonging. So I've seen access. So I was a disability rights lawyer, right? So I use the Americans with Disabilities Act quite a bit. It's a great law, but it has limits. And the limits are that access can get you in the door of a building if you have, maybe an issue with mobility, or can require somebody to provide you a Braille version of a book if you need it for your work or your school. But that is different than belonging, right? Some of our churches, they're thinking about how are we accessible to all people with all different kinds of abilities, right? If you build the ramp and let them in the door, but at coffee hour you don't talk to them, you don't ask for their story, that's not belonging, and that's not enough. So part of the reason I wanted to go into this ministry was we can't stop at access. The law can only go so far. After that, human beings and spirit and God need to enfold people into communities. So, this is what we're talking about when we're talking about radical belonging. All right, let's go to the next slide here. And we've already heard this, but I want to hold this up because the W.I.S.E program that you're about to see today is really new. It started in 2015 when Reverend Alan Johnson stood up in front of the UCC General Synod and spoke some hard truth. He said, many people living with mental illnesses are shunned, feared, and discriminated against, and so they're not included in communities of care. That we normally extend to anybody who is dealing with diabetes or cancer or a surgery, any kind of condition. So, like Sarah was talking about, we don't talk about things in church, and we have to struggle alone, or families struggle alone, and only trust a few family members, and it's a secret, and that's not acceptable. And the W.I.S.E program is hopefully going to help us stop that cycle of secrets keeping in our congregations. Okay, let's go to the next one. All right, here's a really quick history lesson. So, mental health ministry in the UCC has been happening for a while. It really started in 1992 when the Mental Health Network, which was called, I think, the Mental Illness Network, began with a grant. So we've been talking about this for a while as a denomination. And if there are other people of other denominations here, I want to hold up, for example, that the Presbyterian Church is working on setting up a mental health network right now. So I'm talking from the UCC perspective, but of course, people of goodwill and compassion in many different faith communities, our Muslim brothers and sisters, our Jewish brothers and sisters, I've also been on this journey. In 1995, the UCC Synod, we had this resolution in collaboration with the UCC Disability Ministries to widen the welcome, and there were several conferences that talked about physical disability issues and mental health issues. And then in 2013, the UCC Mental Health Network was created, and we're now an independent 501c3. In 2015, though, we had this resolution that was not just to acknowledge, but to say, churches, let's follow a path, let's really do this. And since then, as of right now, we have 11 churches who have become WISE across the country. That's a pretty big deal, because you don't just wake up one day and say, yeah, we're going to be welcoming, inclusive, supportive, engaged for people with mental health challenges. Churches have to think about it. They have to journey with it, with God, to do this. All right, so I'm going to go to the next slide now. So this is just a little bit of the context, but it raises the question that Alan raised in 2015 when he was presenting the W.I.S.E resolution. Where does your church bring casseroles for people who've just come out of a psych unit, or are very depressed and are having a hard time just even getting out of bed to feed themselves, right? A lot of churches here are already doing things, so you have answers to this. But this is maybe the beginning question. Where are we? Where are we to hear people's stories, and where is our church to give love when people need the support? Because at least at my church, we had to admit at the beginning of this process, we're much better. Baby's born, somebody gets home from the hospital, you got 10 people who are like geared up for like a week who are going to provide food, or 2 weeks, or whatever is needed. Somebody comes home from a psych hospital, did we have anything that extensive? No, why not? Why not? Stigma, exactly. Right? Right? So, next slide. So once you ask that question, if you're willing to be honest, like the people here are, and go, yeah, something's happening here. There's something we're not doing. We're ready to start that WISE journey. And it is actually a program, and the reason we did this is we don't just let people say we're WISE churches, is because we want to make sure that people have done the work, the education, looking at stigma in ourselves and in our communities, and not being perfect, that's not what it's about, but being willing to live into a way in which we, the church, our individual congregations, welcome, include, support, and engage people with mental health issues. And by the way, if you are not a UCC church, you can still be a WISE faith community. This is not exclusive, it's not exclusive. So if you're a Methodist, or a Presbyterian, or a Lutheran, or if you're a synagogue, if you have a mosque, you want to be a WISE mosque? Absolutely, let's talk, right? Because it's about how we are in the world. So I just want to put that caveat. So here are the 11 WISE congregations. Oh, the next one, please. Sorry. And you can just see how they're all over. You have one, First Congregational Church of Berkeley here in California. They became WISE in February. Congratulations. But we could use some more here in California. And you know, there's one WISE conference, which is Florida. I don't know, I think this would be a good WISE conference. You want to be the second WISE conference? Yeah. There you go. All right, you're going to be in competition with the Rocky Mountain Conference in Denver, so, and Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming. This will be healthy God spirit-filled competition, right? All right. So let's go to the next slide. All right, so here are the 10 steps, and we're going to break them down, but I'm just going to go over them really quickly. First is consult your pastor. That's pretty important. We're UCC churches. Sometimes we just decide we're going to do stuff, and we don't remember to tell your senior leadership. And they're like, we'll talk a little bit more about why that's important. Form a WISE team, which is a dedicated group of people who are going to walk with the congregation to do this work. Connect to the UCC network. Develop an approach that leads to the church moving into covenant, a WISE covenant. You draft it, you involve your church's leadership, you vote on it, you celebrate, you certify, you get this great certificate. I'm the one who sends it out, so I know that they're great. And they'll come to you. And then you publicize it, and you think about how you're going to live into this into the future. So that's the quick overview. Now we're going to go into it a little bit more. So next slide. So welcoming. You're going to consult with your pastor, form a WISE team, and connect with the UCC Mental Health Network. You got to start with stigma first. And as somebody who lives with mental health challenges, I have to admit that I have stigma about my own mental health challenges and how other people live with them. And I wish I didn't, but I have to be aware of that every day. What is authentic? What is really happening with the person in front of me? Am I seeing them clearly, or am I hearing a little bit about what society tells me is happening? And I have to put that aside and go, wait, that's not, no. Is the person here, the child of God here. One good way to do that, over the practical tips, is that Pathways to Promise is a fantastic website that is a ecumenical site around mental health. They have a survey form that you can use in your church. So just to get started, you can have everybody take the survey, no stress. So you can find out what is known and what isn't known in your congregation. And later on today, Robin Kempster and I think Tony Dunbar are going to talk about the basics of starting a mental health ministry at your church. The City of Refuge is doing this now. So we're going to hear about some of the very practical things to do. And number 3, I want to point out, so you have your WISE team, you want to connect with the Mental Health Network because we are here to help you. The board, the website, the resources. Call us, let us know. Let us know how we can support you once you decide to do this. Okay. Go ahead and go to the next one. Oh, you know what? I should. Okay. You know all this stuff I'm talking about? If you're taking lots of notes, this is in your packet. You are the first WISE conference to get this. Yeah. Right? This is a lot of what I'm talking about in here. So, you know, look at me, don't look at your book, but it's in here. So we're going to cover a little bit extra, but this is a resource. And let us know how it works for you. Let us know how you like it. All right. So this brings us to one of the areas that I think is really important when you start to talk about this, is shared behavioral boundaries versus safety. There is so much stigma equating having a mental health condition with being dangerous, which we just know is not true. It's just not true, right? 1 in 4 people, some say 1 in 5, depends on who you ask, are living with a mental health issue that could be diagnosed right now, myself included, right? And 1 in 25 live with a serious mental illness, which is defined as schizophrenia, bipolar. So it's more of a medical idea of what serious is, but they're very impacted to the point that it's very hard to work and do. It's challenging. And so, I mean, if we just do the math about how many people are in this room, this is so many of us. Or we love someone who's living with this kind of situation, who's living with a mental health challenge. So we know dangerousness isn't the issue. But the issue sometimes is that our clergy doesn't have training. That clergy here does. But for a lot of people, they don't cover mental health in seminary. Right? I graduated in 2016 at W.I.S.E in Denver. I was really lucky. They had a mental health first aid class, but it wasn't a big part of our pastoral care discussion. So you could go find out the information, but we weren't given basic facts, which is a problem because people who are in a community of faith who are experiencing a mental health issue and their families often come to the pastor first, right? So if you are a faith leader, you're a gatekeeper to services. Doesn't mean you have to be an expert, but we have to hold people up and encourage them to get help and let them know that they are beloved children of God. They absolutely deserve all the care that they need to thrive. And we will be there with them, right? But a lot of pastors just don't know. So if they don't, you know, that's kind of why you want to tell your pastor at first that you want to do this WISE thing if they didn't bring it to you. And then you want to have enough training of the congregation, including your pastor, so that they know and you know what are the resources in the community and how can we walk with a person who has come to us who wants to be in beloved community with us. And fears of safety, usually I've found, are more about feeling uncomfortable because people will not behave in expected ways. And when you dig down a little bit into that, it's, well, we're afraid people are going to be disruptive, or whatever it is that we have the culture at church that we like. In some churches, like, people have the pews that are like their pew for Sunday. And we don't want that disruptive. But, you know, Christ didn't come for us to always be comfortable and have our favorite pew. It was to do love and do justice. So we just have to remind our congregations to think about this as we're walking through the WISE process, right? And I think in this room in particular, City of Refuge is doing so much work. People know this and live this out every single day. But I put it up there because it's one of the first things that sometimes comes up. And so you want to be ready for it. You know, the statistics are clear. Folks with a mental health challenge are 4 times more likely to be a victim of violence than to perpetrate. So, okay, so let's go to our next slide. All right. So then you need to develop an approach that leads to the congregation scope to become a WISE congregation for mental health. And in the UCC covenant, that's how we pledge to each other and to God and to the larger community how we are going to be in the world as church. So covenant is not the end of this process, but the goal is to have a covenant that is voted on by the congregation that we are going to live together in a certain way, right? So that takes some strategy. So you want to sit down, who are the church leaders? Who are the church council? Who are the people maybe in the community that you want to talk to in church members? Particularly if there are some members who are living with mental health challenges and are really open about this, ask them, what's the process that we need to follow to do this in a very intentional and loving and supportive way? And you create a plan. You know, if anybody's ever done a building fund, you know how to do this. You have to think about it, and you can do it. And there's lots of other churches who have done it. So if you're like, well, what are we going to do, right? The UCC Mental Health Network, we're here to help you figure out how to do that. Then you're going to draft your W.I.S.E covenant, right? Usually the leadership, there's this core W.I.S.E team that does it, and then you talk with different groups in the congregation to craft it so that it really fits what you need as a church. And there are examples, and I'm going to go over in a minute some of the elements that you want to have. And 6, again, you involve your church's leadership in every process, every part of this process. Okay, let's go to the next one. Next slide, please. All right, and the essentials that you want in this W.I.S.E covenant, and again, there's more in the book. You want to educate yourself, your congregation, and the larger community on mental health challenges, substance use disorders, and brain disorders. So that's usually one of the things that is included, that we as a congregation make a commitment to do this, not just once, but the way we are in the world. We're going to continue being involved and educated. Then we're going to examine the attitudes and preconceived notions about people with mental health challenges and their families that we have, and that's an ongoing process. We're going to pledge to include people at all levels of the church, the life, work, and leadership of the congregation, right? Pastors actually have higher levels of depression and mental health challenges, actually, than the general population. They're along with other helping professions like EMT folks. So wouldn't it be radical, right, if I wanted to be the minister at your church, if I could be honest with you and say, I'm doing really well, but I do have this history, and I'm going to be honest with you and tell you my story, and you were still willing to talk to me and consider me for your pulpit, right? Maybe not assuming that, oh, well, this person has had this experience, they can't do this. Yeah, they can. Head of your council. We find ways to involve people as they are called. But if we decide that certain conditions mean that you can't lead, then we're not being inclusive. We're not looking at the individual and seeing what they can do. Okay. And then we're going to partner, and this is interesting, we're going to partner with other organizations, faith organizations, organizations like NAMI, that work at the intersectionality of mental health and spirituality. Because we're not, as a covenanted community, we're not going to stay focused on just ourselves, because we're supposed to do work in the world. So we are going to partner, and we covenant to partner as part of our W.I.S.E covenant. So again, there's different examples online, right? So you can see how to do this and you can get help, but I want to give you an overview. Then you vote on the W.I.S.E covenant. And that can be kind of a big thing. You want to prepare for that, you want to talk about that. You want to make sure and reach out if somebody votes no. I was lucky enough in my church, it was unanimous, but it isn't always. And when it's not, there's usually a story or a pain or something very real if somebody voted no. And we don't want to just turn aside people and say your voices don't matter. We have to be in loving relationship and find out why. Because a lot of the times, through those conversations, we can find out what the concern is, what's the pain, and we can do ministry there. So that that W.I.S.E covenant actually makes sense for everybody in the congregation. Please share your successful vote with us. We'll send you the really cool certificate, but more importantly, you will be acknowledged as a leader in the nation, a leading church doing mental health ministry. So you're going to certify and celebrate. And you want to continue to support your pastor in this, because, you know, people have talked about pastors get pressure from other pastors in the larger community. They need your support to bring this out in the community in what they're doing when they preach at other churches, when they talk out in lots of different settings. Okay, let's go ahead. Next slide. And so part of being wise, and this is happening as you become wise and we learn from one another during this process, but also after you become wise and you pass that covenant, we're going to have to practice radical belonging regularly. You're going to have to provide companionship for people who come in your doors. This church already knows how to do this. But if you don't know, there's training for that. How do you sit with somebody who might have active mental health symptoms, but they want to be here, and let them know that they are welcome and they belong? You want to use rituals, and you want to acknowledge the work of the people who are doing mental health ministry in your church. Like maybe you commission your W.I.S.E team. You want to begin maybe hosting regular education sessions, right? Or if you've been doing them as part of your W.I.S.E process, don't just stop because you're a W.I.S certified church, keep going. The community needs you to provide that education. You could start a mental health support group. Alan is going to be doing a workshop on that. And you can partner with NAMI, and NAMI Alameda has a table in the back. They're happy to talk with you about what is involved in bringing in a support group by NAMI into your church. And if you have the expertise like they do here of people who are skilled, you can offer direct mental health services in partnership in your congregation. But you don't have to, because being a W.I.S church doesn't mean that everyone in the church is a mental health expert. In fact, part of being W.I.S is acknowledging what we don't know and how we are church, but how we also have to partner with mental health professionals and people who are trained, to do this work. Okay, let's go on to the next one. All right, 9 and 10. You publicize that you are wise and you turn to the future. So, in my work in Denver, and actually here in the Bay Area, when I was a lawyer here, there was no list that I knew of for vets that I would work with. I also worked just in the public defenders in San Francisco, and so you would have people who would be brought in by police for being homeless or supposedly, bad behavior or whatever on the streets because they had nowhere else to live. They had no place else to go, so they were kind of criminalized for being homeless. There was no list of churches that they could go to that would walk with them. There were churches who were doing it, but nobody thought to put together a list. That, and now that we are here now, we can do that. We can let our mental health professionals in our area know we are a church that is committed to doing this. Because there are people walking through recovery. In my own experience, you desperately want to connect with a spiritual place of growth and support. And if you don't tell mental health professionals, they won't know. So tell them, because you are going to be a light on a hill to people who are in recovery from mental health or substance use issues or both, if they know that you are a church that really includes and belongs and brings belonging to everybody. So that's pretty important. Okay. We talked about that. Okay, the next one. And that's really it. That's not just it, that's a lot. Which is why you don't have to remember this. You have this lovely book. But we find that this is really helpful because you need a framework to do this kind of work. Just saying, go be wise. That's overwhelming. And this may take your church, if you're not already there, this may take you a year or two. And that's okay, it's not a race. Because this is about transformation. This is about finding a new way to live out the gospel. That takes time and thought. So I want to encourage you, over the rest of the day, there's going to be information on how you do this even further. And please stay, because at the very end of the day, Robin is going to be showing some very practical things that she has done. And Tony's going to be talking about what City of Refuge does, so that you can see practically how this happens. And I'm going to be around. If you want a copy of this PowerPoint, give me your card or your number. But you now have this great booklet, so you don't actually need this. Okay, I was part of the team that put this booklet together. So. But thank you. I don't even know. Do I have time for questions? Okay. So I think we have, 10 minutes?
That's right.
Ah!
Awesome. Here's a suggestion. We have a little time before we have a break at 10:30, and that is to have Sarah and Amy right here at the mic still. If there's a comment, a question that can come from all of you, that would be great. And you probably have to speak up.
Okay. This has mental health challenges, often it means that they alienate themselves or they don't get help. So there's that piece, and how is that included and folded into serving people? And is there any covenant related to the person themselves? For instance, I can't, if someone's going with untreated mental challenges, having them in leadership is a challenge. Then there's some challenges that are particularly challenging in a church situation, such as borderline personality and such. So how do you dig into those kinds of things? Because it's one thing to walk alongside someone suffering from depression or anxiety. It's another thing if someone's borderline, and sometimes if they're bipolar and schizophrenic, all that.
Do we want to do the run, or do you want to just use the mic? That's right. That's more accessible for people.
Yes.
Okay. Do you want to start this first?
I think that a lot of times we make assumptions about people, and instead of having these open, honest conversations about what's really going on. And so that's kind of what comes to my mind as you talk about, people who are exhibiting active symptoms. Is there a person that they trust, that they can actually share, what is going on, and brainstorm together how to get them the support that they need? Because at this point, it's really not about getting the committee work done. It's about helping that person to be well. And so I think having these safe places to have open conversations really helps wrap a person around with care. And not to make assumptions about people, but to have those open conversations.
So, I think one thing, I'm going to give a couple of practical suggestions. One is, again, education, because there are, you can get education about borderline personality disorder. And if you know that and that education is already there, behavioral covenants with people, but I think what the secret is, we got to have a behavioral covenant for the whole congregation, right? Because we're not going to, well, you need a covenant, but you don't. I mean, we all do, and because we don't really articulate the expected norms in our churches, right? So if you come from another country, or even from like a different denomination, and you visit your church, if you don't know this is quite something. So one thing you can do is you can create church-wide covenants, and then have honest conversations with individuals who are doing this. And I think being wise does not mean, and in my church we've had conversations about this, does not mean saying that everybody can do everything if they don't have the capacity at that time. We, for many different reasons in our lives, cannot step up as church leaders for certain reasons at certain times. And sometimes faith communities help us do that.
Yes, hi, my name is Mother Elaine Jones, and I'm a refugee. This amazing church saved my life. I had 73 suicide attempts, and my next one would have been, I would have been in Napa for the rest of my life. But I did, I cut my wrist in front of the City of Refuge. And I just couldn't believe that somebody would come out there to see about me and also follow me to the hospital. So I had to come back to this amazing church. And God put me to work. I take care of 86 seniors. A lot of them have mental illness. The problem that I'm having is that, I've been suicide-free for 16 years. Thank you, Jesus. For me, and I have to find that love and that joy, and it's real hard, being beaten up all the time by seniors that have mental illness. I've had feces thrown at me, and all this stuff. But I work with these staff, and the one thing that really pisses me off, they don't allow me to be pissed off. They say, oh, she got mental illness. No, I'm pissed off at her. And then if you get arrested, they don't know that I've been suicide-free for 16 years. The minute you go in into the system, honey, they put those jackets on you in a cell, toward the back in the middle of the floor, and they treat you horribly. And I'm so grateful. I am so grateful. I have a chance to sit down here and educate me and let me know that I am loved and I can continue fighting this fight for the rest of my life. And I still having issues with self-mutilation. I don't purge as much because I got off the Seroquel. But Jesus Christ, this church, this family, I wouldn't be here. And I want to thank all of you for loving me.
See what God can do. See what God can do. And God bless you. Thank you for sharing your life with us. Thank you.
My name is Kathy, and I would also like to say sometimes that people come and say they are schizoaffective or bipolar, and these are often labels that are put on to you by the mental health system. These are labels that are put on to you by doctors that see you for 5 minutes once a year or every 6 months. They are not put on to you by your therapists who see you weekly, who listen to you and hear you, and they don't have the same diagnosis that the doctors have put on you. And so when you go to your churches and because you are a layperson, you're not in the medical field, you say, I'm schizoaffective. Well, the truth is, I'm not schizoaffective. And it was a label that was just put on me. And, but I didn't know, and so I said I was schizoaffective. And I went to a therapist and worked for 17 years, and I worked hard, and I worked long, and I was very committed to getting well. And it turns out that I have severe post-traumatic stress. Not schizoaffective, but if I was, that would be okay. But what I did was, I scared the individual by saying that I was schizoaffective. And sometimes labels scare people. And so sometimes we just need to go up to people and say, please listen to me. Please hear what I have to say. Please just listen to me and care about me and love me for who I am. And that's what I'd like to say.
Hello, I'm Karen from First Congregational Church of Oakland, and I just wanted to know, personally I do work with people when they're double and triple and quadruple diagnosed. How will this help? How will this program help with that?
Amy, before we get to that, I want to comment on your beautiful illustration of person-first language that is part of disability rights and justice, that we had a name. Use my name, call me by my name. And you are a child of God, person first. So thank you so much for that.
So the W.I.S.E program is a way of being church in the world. And I think for the people that you kindly and compassionately walk with, the church can partner with individuals who are maybe getting help from mental health professionals, right? We're body, mind, spirit. All of that is involved in our mental health. And the church may not have the ability to necessarily deal with the medical part. In fact, they probably shouldn't unless you've got really skilled people who have like a program. But the rest of it, I think what you're saying is you can see the person as a person and hold their worth, as Sarah said, as a child of God. And every church figures out what are you called to do in your community. And because of your skills and training, you are going to be able to help UCC Oakland figure out how it can walk with people that are in different phases of their recovery. So, thank you.
There has been some new brain science about the plasticity of the brain, and that a compassionate gaze can change the brain. People who have been traumatized and suffering, if you gaze at them with compassion and love, that will heal their brain. And so what can the church do? The church can engage in a loving gaze and really just be there. Be present. Be there.
Yeah.
I guess my question has to do with, thank you so much for your presentations and for encouraging honesty and to break our secrets. I have an uncle who always reminds our family when we're talking about, oh, so-and-so's crazy, he always says, everybody got a little crazy in them. And the craziness I want to talk about, I asked the question, I guess, is about how we can begin to talk about the social systems that would create the labels, with those social systems of racism, heterosexism, homophobia, sexism, and I think about the disease that was diagnosed in 1851 that I like to talk about is, I don't like to talk about it, but to teach about it, from Samuel Cartwright, who diagnosed drapetomania as one of the first mental illnesses of African Americans, and it was the mental illness of the runaway slave. That if you felt that you could be free from slavery, you must be crazy. And the remedy of it was to beat people, and so when we see the lynchings and the marks on the back, that was a cure to keep people oppressed. And I guess how can we begin to talk about maybe the cultures, not only the downside of the power, but also the resiliency in the cultures. I was serving a church, a multiracial church, where my supervisor was not African American, and didn't understand that when one of the women started shouting in the choir, who was African American, when they said, I just wanted to grab her and set her down. And I'm just like, well, you know, there's so many people with mental illnesses, drive-by shootings, they block their children. If they don't shout, the reason I come here because I can shout and fall on the floor here. But how can we engage to talk about the resiliency, particularly in the music, art, and our own worship, and see that as a resource for healing?
Wow. That's great.
City of Refuge is a healing place, and you're doing that here. So we are learning from you. I was walking the halls and seeing all the artwork, and that is healing. Your music is healing. And there is research that shows that systemic oppressions increases the vulnerability to addiction and mental health challenges. And it's because people are oppressed, and they're in pain caused by the systemic oppressions in society, and that is a sin. The oppression is a sin. The mental illness isn't a sin, but the systems are sinful systems. And so part of the work of justice as the United Church of Christ is to work to change those systems. And we can do that together, learning from each other. So thank you very much.
Well, we have been breaking the silence this morning, and this is just beginning. Hallelujah for that. And so, just before we go into a break, yes?
I had a question.
Okay.
I was the last question. Sorry, guys. I'll make it quick. My question is for Sarah and Amy in the sense of, I want to know, my diagnosis was bipolar disorder, manic depression. I'm 40 years old, Joe. I look like I'm 25, but I'm 40. And I want to know, how do I help the youth of today? Because my question is for the young people. When I was diagnosed, I was 5 years old. My mom didn't know about medication for kids at 5 years old. And what she did was the best job she could, but I'm anti-medicine. I'm into holistic approach. And for me, now at 40, I want to help these kids up here that need some help that can't identify when they turn teenagers and have hormonal problems. How do they fix that with parents who can't understand what they're going through? Can you tell me what I can do for the youth of today?
Tell me your name again.
My name's Netta.
Netta, thank you for your story. Beautiful story of your recovery. And when we talk about W.I.S E, we can think about it in our youth groups. And so one example is a church that every time the youth gather, they always talk about mental health. They normalize it. It's not, if you know someone, it's we all are knowing someone. And the way social media and texting works and technology, we have our kids getting text messages at 3 a.m. from their friends who are texting them suicidal messages. And so our kids are already living in it. And we need to be courageous enough to come alongside our kids and give them the resources that they need. A lot of churches can support the facilitating of resources for youth. When I talked to the director of the Children's Hospital in Columbus, Ohio, she said we don't have the space to provide the services we need. What if churches could connect with the care providers and say, use our facility to have your programs here? And so there's a lot of things we can do, and I thank you for lifting that up, because prevention can start at age 0. At birth, we can begin to help prevent and support holistic care.
Just on top of that, in terms of breaking any kind of silence, somebody has to speak, as you just had out of your own heart. There needs to be someone to listen. And sometimes we need to say, sometimes we do have big hearts, but we also need a couple ears to listen. And the capacity to actually acknowledge the person in front of them. I think kids need to know that they are known. And that is a power that you can bring with your own heart and your own openness. And thank you for raising that as well. It's great. So, I feel like I'm changing gears along the way. I'm just so excited about being here. So the core groups are coming up, and that's going to be at 11